Assalamu alaikum once again, everyone. Let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in amma ba'd. So last week we had pretty much a whole session dedicated to different forms of ibadah and how the obligation of worship affects different people in different ways. There was examples of the ruler, of the alim, of the wealthy person versus the poor person, etc., etc. So we're going to move on, inshallah, today. Continue on to the next line. So Imam Muhasibi says, وَلَا تَشْكُ مَنْ هُوَ أَرْحَمُ بِكَ إِلَى مَنْ لَا يَرْحَمُكَ واستعن بالله تكن من أهل خاصته. قال عبادة بن الصامت رضي الله تعالى عنه أظهر اليأس مما في أيدي الناس فإنه الغنى وإياك والطمع وطلب الحاجات فإنه الفقر وإذا صليت فصل صلاة مودع. So he says, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّكَ لَنْ تَجِدَ طَعْمَ الْإِيمَانِ حَتَّى تُؤْمِنَ بِالْقَدْرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ. That's probably all I have time to cover. Okay, so he says, and do not complain about the one who is more merciful to you, to the one who is not merciful to you. I'll explain what that means, inshallah. And seek help with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wasta'in billah. Seek assistance and help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and through that, by seeking Allah's assistance, you will become Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's special servant. And then he quotes Ubadah ibn Samit radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the famous Sahabi, who said, أظهر اليأس مما في أيدي الناس, express or show despair from what belongs to people, what is in the hands of people, meaning despair of what people own. Don't covet what people own, because and to be able to do that is wealthiness. To be able to do that is wealth, is basically being rich. That's what being wealthy, being well-to-do and wealthy is about. What in Arabic is called ghina. And then he says, and beware of coveting what others have. Iyaka wa tama. Beware of beware of greedily coveting what other people have and seeking your needs from others, because that is poverty. And he's obviously saying this irrespective of what you already have, right? Regardless of whether you have a lot or less, at the end of the day, the solutions to your problems aren't in people's hands. So despair of what's in the hands of people, because that is true wealth. And don't covet what is in the hands of others, and don't seek your needs from them, because that is poverty. وَإِذَا صَلَّيْتَ فَصَلِّ صَلَاةَ مُوَدِّعٍ. And when you pray salah, then pray the salah of a person who is saying goodbye, who is bidding farewell. Salata muwaddi'in, the salah of a person who is bidding farewell. And finally, in the last line, he says, know that you will not acquire the ta'am al-iman. You will not acquire the taste of iman until you believe in qadar, the good of it and the bad of it. I.e. that the good of it and the bad of it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that understood? All right, so let's go through that. So he starts off by saying, do not complain about the one who is more merciful to you, or the most merciful to you, to one who does not have mercy upon you. And what that basically means is, do not complain about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to people. Okay? So the kind of things that sometimes we do, we talk to each other and we say, oh, I wish Allah had done this for me, or we're even though we're making reference to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though we're showing faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we're kind of complaining, right? We're complaining about Allah, and we're complaining to other people. Yeah. So we're saying to other people, why did Allah have to do this to me? I prayed so much and I do this and I do that, but still I have problems. I prayed so much for financial, success, but I haven't got it. Whatever it may be, right? What have I done that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done this to me? In various ways, people basically complain about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Somebody passes away, that, oh, why Allah? Why did you have to take him or her? So this is basically complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is complaining about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My apologies. So this is complaining about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to others. And Allah is saying, why you complain? Don't complain about the one who is the most merciful to you, to people who are not merciful to you. Now, that doesn't mean that other people have no mercy towards you, like your parents, for example. It means that other people are not capable of being truly merciful to you, because other people do not know what is in your interests. That's the bottom line, right? The bottom line is that, your parents can probably throughout their lives have done many, many things with the best of intentions that have actually been very, very bad for you. It may be, and in the case of in the particular case of the issue that you're complaining about, right? Whether it is somebody passing away, or whether it is a financial difficulty, or whether it is a particular illness, or whether it is I don't know, all of the possibilities, right? نقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات, reduction in wealth, loss of a harvest, or accident of a car, you have an accident, or something gets stolen. All of the whatever potential calamity that one might complain about, by using the word, by framing it in terms of complaining that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has caused that to them. It's a kind of believer's problem of evil. There's atheists who will say, if God is so merciful, then why do bad things happen? And there's a kind of problem of evil articulated in the words of a believer, where they will complain about Allah to others, right? It's kind of like that. It's just like, oh, why has Allah done this to me? And why has this happened to me, etc., etc. And the truth of the matter is that, well, first of all, you don't know why it's happened to you. And secondly, whatever the case may be, one thing is certain, and that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to you. And what that basically means, that's a theological truth, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being merciful isn't a question that it's not up for debate. It isn't something that is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not knowing what's in our best interest isn't up for debate. He definitely knows. Like, you can't, does Allah know what's in my best interest? That's not even a question. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala definitely knows what's in our best interest, right? So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite being more merciful, has put us through a particular trial. All right? And we spoke about this idea of precious metal being purified, gold being purified in the fire, right? What exactly the benefit or harm is of a given situation is not known to us, and therefore we can't possibly complain about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who we know as a matter of iman, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is beneficial to us and what is harmful to us. In that context, how can we complain about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So that's the point, basically. Anyway, I mean, there are scenarios. Life is so complex that there are people who reflect back on their lives, and there is a particular moment in their life that they thought of as a really, really bad moment. It's something that, you know, that really shook them, that was really bad, that at the time they complained about, that at the time that, you know, it nearly destroyed their faith, or etc., etc., etc. But then when they look back in 5, 10 years, 20 years time, they realize that that was a watershed moment for them in their lives, right? They realize that moment was actually a turning point for them, because it made them learn X, Y, Z lesson. It made them hit rock bottom, or whatever it is. Basically, it taught them the biggest lesson they needed to learn in order to turn their lives around. So these things happen in people's lives. People usually turn their lives around after being tested. Right? People usually find the right path, or find some sort of turnaround in their life from a bad situation to a good situation because of some kind of trial. So trials have this amazing effect a positive effect on people, except when they negatively process it. And that's really got nothing to do with the reality of the trial. That's just to do with the person's mentality. It's to do with weakness of the person's iman. Okay? So the right attitude is, the Prophet ﷺ used to complain to Allah, not complain about Allah. So for example, Yaqub alayhi salam was put through so much trial, losing his son, then losing his, you know, his son Yusuf, then losing his son Binyamin, and then pretty much his family becoming scattered, etc., then losing his sight, etc. And he used to say, "Innama ashku bathi wa huzni ila Allah wa a'lamu min Allah ma la ta'lamun." And I'll just translate the first part of that. He used to say, his wording was that I complain about my kind of scattered status and my grief. I complain about my grief to Allah, right? I complain about it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I have these things that are grieving me, that are upsetting me, that are that are causing me stress, but but ultimately it's from Allah. So I'm going to tell Allah about it. Because what is complaining? Complaining is telling people about something, right? Telling people about your problems. Telling somebody about your problems is a complaint. So he used to say, I'm going to complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that used to be the sunnah of the Anbiya. That if you're going to complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyway, so that's the first part. Then he says, seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, takun min ahli khassati. This is quite interesting, actually. It reminds me of something that one of my teachers used to say, and it probably is something that needs reflecting on, because sometimes I have to say I've had moments when I've, in my kind of ghafla, sometimes felt like this. One of my teachers used to say, when you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're making dua to Allah who knows already what your needs are. And given that Allah already knows what your needs are, why spell it out to him? He already knows what your needs are. Isn't it kind of, isn't it like stating the obvious, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows? And he used to just do that as a thought experiment, I think. He used to always ask us this question to make us think. And then he used to explain that even though, in fact, he used to say that it's kind of disrespectful to know that to say that on the one hand, Allah knows everything, but then tell him your needs. And then he said, well, from that point of view, whatever it may be, but the reason why we make dua to Allah and ask for help from Allah is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to. All right? And this line tells us kind of why. It isn't really to tell Allah what our needs are, because He already knows that, but it's really to establish a relationship of need that acknowledges that, oh Allah, I am your servant, I am your servant, I am your creation, I am needy of you, and you are the one that needs that. It is you who created me and who sustains me basically in my life. So it is a relationship in which the dynamic, the the power dynamic, if you like, is clear, right? Of servant, master, creator, created, needy, needed, etc. So all of these basically, these dynamics are clear. It is so therefore it is a relationship that is based upon Iman. It is based upon everything in its right place. It is, and it's based upon a true reflection of our reality, right, vis-a-vis Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is what our reality is. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, therefore Imam Muhasibi is saying that ista'in billahi takun min ahli khassatihi, that seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will become His special people. Because really, once you've done that, you have both established that you believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfilled your will fulfill your needs, or can only fulfill your needs. So you've established Iman at that level. You believe that you are Allah's slave and servant, and therefore you have to ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your master, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the giver and the fulfiller of needs. So you've acknowledged that. You've acknowledged another attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as another attribute of yourself. You've acknowledged that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can and has the power to provide your needs, or not, and that ultimately whatever Allah, that ultimately, if your needs are going to be fulfilled, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fulfill them, even if He does it through other means, and so on. And therefore, seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really about establishing a spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that reflects the reality that we are in, right? The reality of who we are and who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And this is about seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not about not doing any work, right? This is about seeking help, meaning that as a standard process, the believers seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then having sought Allah's help, they go ahead and do what they have to. Right? So seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to seek facilitation, right, in what we are going to do. We still have to go ahead and do it. But in seeking Allah's help, we are establishing that relationship. Because if you don't seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help and you become more and more reliant, you basically keep going ahead and just doing everything without Allah's help. You don't stop to make a dua. You don't stop to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help. Then even though we're believers, even though we believe in Allah, even though we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does everything, what happens though is that a certain the idea creeps into our heads that we control every aspect of our destiny. The idea creeps into our heads that we are in control, or the idea creeps into our heads that ultimately results are completely in my hands. The idea creeps into our heads that 100%, of whatever I am doing, I'm going to get its result, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, we lose out from the spiritual benefits of seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance and help, because it is Allah who will reward us by making us His special people. The other thing is, there is an impact of dua. Right? There is actually a material, worldly impact of dua that sometimes that often, if it's good for us, results in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving us what we need, right? And not just giving us what we've asked for, but giving us what we need in that moment. That means that sometimes we may be pushing, through our action, we may be pursuing one thing, but our dua will get us something else out of the blessing of the dua. right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts du'as either by giving us what we want, what we've asked for because it's good for us, or by not giving us what we've asked for, but giving us what is good for us. So not giving us what we've asked for because we need to be protected from that, because that's not good for us. And then switching that with what is good for us. Or three, preserving the reward, meaning that it isn't destined for us to receive what we've asked for example, or an alternative, but it is, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead reserves the reward of the dua, or reserves that dua as a reward in the hereafter. Whichever it may be, those three, two of them are a direct consequence of dua. One of them you may acquire because of your action, but you lose out from the possibility of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directing you to something that is actually better for you, right? And of course you lose out from the spiritual benefit of being brought closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. So therefore, seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that we do, of course, because we do it in Fatiha every day when we say Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, but we don't necessarily do it consciously, which probably can be stated again in the last sentence of this paragraph. Anyway, stop there on that sentence. And then he's quoting, when he quotes Ubadah ibn Samit radiyallahu anhu, he says, أظهر اليأس مما في أيدي الناس, show despair in what is in people's hands. And one of the things that is said often about some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, really in contrast to how people had become later, one of the observations about them was that they had been taught by the Prophet ﷺ to be so independent that even if they had mounted an animal like a camel or a horse and the whip dropped and fell on the floor as somebody was going past, they refused to ask that person to hand the whip over to them, because the Prophet ﷺ had taught them not to ask for any of their needs from people, right? Meaning they completely practiced that literally. They always did their own work. They always did their own work. Whatever needed to be done, they did it for themselves, and they depended only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they had this complete independence from other people, from other people's time, from other people's effort, but also other people's wealth, from other people's belongings, and so on. So that's the reflection of this piece of advice, that demonstrate a complete despair from what is in the hands of people. فَإِنَّهُ الْغِنَى, because that is true ghina, that is true wealth. Meaning that if you can become like that and still live your life, then you will you will end up with a fairly good state of mind, because you'll end up probably not being in debt. You'll end up living within your means. You'll end up living with your honor and integrity intact. You'll never have to suffer other people basically doing what we call in Arabic man, right? I can't think of an English word for it. When other people reminding you of their favor, that's man. So reminding you of the favor that they have done. Oh, didn't I do this for you on such and such a day? This in Arabic is called man, which is reminding another person of the favor that they did for you. Or somebody doing that to you, basically. So all of these things that you save yourself from, and of course, all along you've also been somebody who has always done this reliant upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is a great quality to be able to have. It doesn't mean that in the most desperate of situations it isn't permissible for you to ask for help. It is. But generally that quality will mean that you will only ask the people who are closest to you, people who you absolutely trust, people who will never mistreat you, etc., etc. And also because you're not somebody who habitually asks others to help you, it'll probably mean that people will be more willing to help you, right? And so on. So and then beware of greed and coveting what other people have and seeking needs from them, because that is poverty. Because the interesting thing about the first scenario is that in the first scenario of the independent person, that person, the reality of life, the reality of the ruling of tying your camel, for example, means that that person, even if they have a millionaire, uh, best friend, right? That person will still value, based upon this nasiha, will value and this teaching of the Prophet ﷺ as well, because some of the hadith reflect this, will value their independence and therefore not rely on that person, and therefore will make a success for themselves. And that success and that lack of dependency upon others and that independent success of this second individual is also good for society at large, right? Whereas if they become dependent upon others and they have a tendency up here to always look at what somebody else has, I want what that person has, or they basically, tama is when you look at what somebody else has with a view to getting them to give it to you. Basically, that's tama, right? You look at what somebody else has and you want to see if there is a way to get them to give it to you, right? So this is kind of this coveting what somebody else has, right? But out of the desire to get it off them, to get them to give it to you. Similarly, talab al-hajat is to then go and seek your needs from another person. Once a person that is a shame barrier. Once a person breaks that barrier, they'll keep doing it again and again and again, right? They'll keep doing it again and again and again. And that's poverty. It's poverty in two senses. One, that's what poor people do, number one. That doesn't mean that when people do that, you shouldn't give them. That's a different issue altogether. That's that's looking at it from the other hand, from the other perspective. But from this perspective, from the perspective of the person who is seeking help or asking for their needs, on the one hand, this is what people do in poverty. But on the other hand, this leads to poverty because that person doesn't have the independence of the other person, who no matter what will do everything in their power to independently stand on their own 2 feet. All right, this person won't feel the need to do it because they're willing to easily go and ask somebody else for help. All right, because that comes to them very, very easily. That makes sense? All right, and finally, وَإِذَا صَلَّيْتَ فَصَلِّ صَلَاةَ مُوَدِّعٍ. When you pray the prayer of the person bidding farewell. Now here, we're moving into the domain, if you like, of khushu'. But one of the things that the Prophet one of the things that was said in a hadith, in fact, is the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, when you pray a farewell prayer. I mean, pray like as if you are saying goodbye. And some of the tabi'un and some of the early predecessors were reported to have prayed in that way, meaning that when other people saw them pray, they described them in that way. So, for example, Sufyan al-Thawri rahmatullahi alayhi had a teacher called Mansur ibn al-Mu'tamir. And Sufyan al-Thawri said about him that if you saw Mansur pray, you'd think that he's gonna die any moment. Meaning that it was as if he had prepared himself mentally to die, that he looked like a person who was kind of at the end of his life. I can't think of what that might look like, but this was Sufyan al-Thawri's description of him. But he was, but he was, but what that usually means is that a kind of they were so somber, and even you know, they looked so humble and so meek and weak when standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it was as if they would fall over, basically, right? So it was the way it was the humility with which they came across in prayer. Anyway, but really it's a state of mind, it's not a state of body. I'm not sure how much of that you can observe. There's nothing wrong with, I don't know, physically standing nice and straight in prayer. Sometimes a person's humility in prayer comes across because they're crying, because there's emotion in their eyes. There's you can see that they are in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in fear of him, etc., etc. But ultimately, praying the prayer of a person saying goodbye is something that's to do with the mind. And what that basically means is that you pray as if it's your last prayer, meaning that I'm going to go to this prayer is going to be so good that this prayer is going to take me to Jannah, because I'm not going to get the chance to do another one. That's the mentality. Which then becomes a question of quality of prayer. Right? It becomes a question of quality of prayer, which brings me back to, we seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala every day in prayer. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. But the reason why this doesn't have the desired spiritual effect on us is because we're not actually saying it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're just saying it. We're just regurgitating it from memory, rather than saying it as though we had said it, you know, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in person, in his presence, right? So iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, as in, you, O Lord, you know, we worship, and only you we seek help from. Saying it as though you're actually saying it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly. That requires practice. That requires owning those words first, building a relationship with the words and their meaning, so that you own those words, and then practicing saying those words as though you were speaking them. Right? So that's part of the idea of the quality of a prayer, and the kind of quality, I suppose, that would be expected of a person who is praying as though it was their farewell prayer. And furthermore, there is a whole, you know, conversation about khushu'. Now, if I was to summarize the quality of prayer to you, I'm just trying to now remember what's the best piece to share from you, because there's a course that I taught a few times called Awakening the Prayer at Ibrahim College, which was about khushu'. But it focused a lot on improving prayer through connecting with meaning. But there were some other aspects to it as well. But Imam al-Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, said that there were 6 qualities in prayer, each building on the other, each building on the last, basically, that were needed for a person to attain khushu', for a person to attain a kind of a fully devoted, fully awakened, fully conscious prayer. So he said that the first quality was and many of us fail right there, but the first quality was hudurul qalb, right? Hudurul qalb, meaning presence of the heart. The second quality, tafahum, right? Understanding what you say. And Imam Ghazali's point is that a person may have presence of mind, meaning they may be very alert and very conscious of the fact that they're standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they're regurgitating words that they don't know, right? So therefore they've achieved something by being present in mind, but there is something additional to add to that by knowing what you're saying, by understanding what you're saying. So that's the second meaning. This is the second layer or second meaning that is required to attain full khushu'. The third is ta'zeem, right? Veneration of Allah, or acknowledging the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. The fourth is awe or haiba, right? That's the fourth quality. So each builds on the other. So you can have a person can be very conscious that they're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they don't understand. But then they're very conscious that they're standing in front of Allah. They understand what they're saying as well, but there's no sign of veneration on them. Meaning, it doesn't appear as though, like, they're really casual. It doesn't appear as though they're standing in front of greatness. So veneration, in your demeanor, there is acknowledgement of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then there is haiba. Sometimes you acknowledge the greatness of someone, but you acknowledge their greatness intellectually, but it doesn't overcome you in the form of a kind of nervous fear that overcomes standing in front of such greatness. So I think I like the word nervousness here, because that's basically what you would feel if you really were standing in front of Allah, right? All of us, that's exactly what we would feel. And the difference between that kind of awe is called awe. The difference between awe and fear is that fear can be for something that is bad. You can be scared. So that's being scared, right? So you can be scared of a snake or a wild animal, or scared of an enemy, and so on and so forth. But awe is when you feel nervous and awestruck, or even fearful, in the presence of someone who you actually respect and venerate, and so on. So that's awe. That was number 4, right? Number 5 is nadam, right? Shame, feeling regret as we pray, feeling regret for our sin, that I'm standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I'm sinful. Number 6 is hope, right? That there is all of those other things, but yet there is still hope. There is hope that when we ask for things in prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give it to us, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept our prayer, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless us and give us all of the things promised as a reward for this prayer, and so on and so forth. So Ghazali says these are 6 qualities that make for a prayer that has khushu'. All right, so there you go. It's quite hard remembering all 6 in order. I think I've got that right. Okay, inshallah. So that's a quick note. I'm sure this is going to come up again and again, but that's a quick note about the idea of a prayer that is of the kind of, perhaps of the kind of quality that I don't know, that reflects what's been said here in terms of the prayer of the person saying farewell. I suppose one other thing I'll say there is all 6 of those qualities, and I often say this when I teach the course as well, that all 6 of those qualities are very, very hard to acquire at once. And therefore, usually what happens is that they come in moments. You get, and it may be because of the way you've interacted, because of the way your mind and your heart has interacted with the verse of the Quran. So there might be a moment of hope going along that accompanies a verse of hope, a moment of fear that accompanies a verse of fear, a moment of awe because of a moment that in which you were overcome by awe because of something said about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in recitation, perhaps, or something that occurred to you, or a moment of veneration, moment of and so on. So I guess presence of mind and understanding underpin all of the others, and the others come in moments. Moment of hope, moment of regret, moments of veneration, moments of awe. But these are only possible if there's presence of mind and if there is understanding. Okay, inshallah. All right. And then he says, know that you will only find the sweetness of Iman, or the taste of Iman, which is sweet, until you will not acquire the taste of Iman until you believe in Qadar, the good of it and the bad of it. Okay? And I can attempt a 5-minute explanation of Qadar, but sometimes I like explaining Qadar in response to questions. But my quick explanation of Qadar and the good and bad of Qadar is the Prophet ﷺ speaks about the good and bad of Qadar in the hadith in terms of, like in the following words, right? You know, the Prophet ﷺ said to Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, who himself says in the hadith that I was behind the Prophet ﷺ one day, probably riding on a camel or something. And the Prophet ﷺ said to me, boy, let me teach you some words. Be mindful of Allah, Allah will be mindful of you. Be mindful of Allah, you'll find Him. Well, you'll find Allah before you. You'll find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of you. And when you ask of Allah. So this hadith reflects a lot of what's been said already in these lines. When you ask from Allah. And when you seek help from Allah. And know that even if all of the people gathered to benefit you in some way, they would not benefit you in any way other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written in your favor. And if all of the people gathered to harm you in some way, they would not harm you in any way except that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written against you, right? Meaning that, you know, this is going to happen against you. It's already been written. The pens have been raised, meaning after everything being written, the pens have been raised, وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفُ, and the scriptures have dried. And of course, this is with reference to the other hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said that the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created was the pen, and then he ordered the pen to write the destinies of everything until the end of time. So therefore, nothing will happen contrary to what has been recorded by the pen. However, what's interesting is this attitude is with regards to what has already happened. Something has happened, you accept it, right? Because there's no way it would have happened any other way. You accept it, right? It's an excellent way to process grief, process difficulty, process failure, process trials, etc., etc., etc. But on the other hand, before something has happened, you tie your camel and you exert your effort to always do things, to influence things for the good, right? Regardless of the odds against you, you never give up. Okay, so for example, you know, the idea that whatever's written is going to happen did not stop the Prophet ﷺ to turn up on the Battle of Badr with 313 Sahaba, and then organizing their ranks and giving them weapons, etc., etc. It did not. The fact that it's already been written did not stop the Prophet ﷺ turning up to Uhud with almost 1,000 companions and then organizing the battlefield in such an amazing way. Why did he do that? Just turn up, right? Just turn up, the angels will help you and that's it, it'll be over. No, the Prophet ﷺ had to take full measures, right? And take full preparations with everything that he had. He didn't turn up with half his force thinking, you know, like whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So I'm just going to go with half my force. No, everybody went. And so on and so forth. There's lots and lots and lots of examples of that. Meaning that in Islam, we believe fundamentally that we have to act before the result. We have to act as though we have full control of the result. Why? Because our choices and our decisions are the basis of our accountability. And we know for certain, absolutely for certain, based on clear categoric verses of the Quran, that human beings have freedom of choice. Right? So what's going to happen has already been written. This is true. We have freedom of choice. That is also true. And they both work together in tandem. How that works, sometimes human beings struggle to understand that. But who cares? It doesn't matter if you struggle to understand it. It's still fact. It doesn't change the fact. Right? The fact that you struggle to understand how, I don't know, how the mobile phone works, doesn't mean it doesn't work, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The fact is, you have freedom of choice. The fact is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had everything written before you were ever created, and everything will happen according to what's been written. The two facts work together, right? Do you have an explanation? Do I have an explanation for that? I think I do. My explanation may satisfy you, might not satisfy you, but it doesn't change the fact. Does that make sense? Now, if you want me to try and explain it to you further, you can ask him the questions because the session is finished. All right, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Okay, what questions have we got here? When does one know when they should reach out for help, or should they attempt to always confide in Allah only? Basically, and when there's it is permissible. Basically, it's permissible to help. It's permissible to seek help. One's attitude should be to try to independently find solutions to the best of one's ability. All right, and one should differentiate between people and people. Does that make sense? One should differentiate between people and people. There are people who are there to help you. It is their duty to help you, right? And you have rights over them. Those people, you've grown up accepting their help. Your parents, right? You've helped them, you know, your siblings, your brothers and sisters, your family, right? Friends, etc., etc. Meaning that there's people and there's people. So over here, we're talking about just, you know, people in general, right? But then obviously there are layers of people, right? So yes, one should try to stand on their own feet, etc., etc. But if one is in a difficult situation, one seeks help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, and then they can seek help from those around them. It is permissible, but the attitude shouldn't change. That attitude of independence should not change, because then what happens is a person borrows money, for example, but they'll be quick to repay or quick to kind of resolve that situation, etc., etc. Or they'll ask people, they'll ask, you know, they'll really ask, seek help from people for themselves. They'll do it for other reasons, but they don't do it for themselves, right? Or, you know, if they get a favor from someone, they'll always look to return it, right? So just for the sake of hal jaza'ul ihsan illa al ihsan, and so on, meaning that they'll act in a principled way because they've developed inside of them this mentality and this quality of self-reliance and independence. Okay. Is it okay to use meditating techniques to increase khushu' in prayer? Yes, it's permissible. Nothing wrong with it. Use whatever techniques that you want. But what we mean by meditating techniques here is, of course, meditating in terms of quietness and stillness and stop, you know, and just thinking, right? Emptying your mind and thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. Yes. In fact, I often say that dhikr is a form of meditation. And some of the Sufis, of course, teach muraqabah, which is a form of meditation, which is just sitting and, you know, just thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or emptying your mind of everything else and just allowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in. And then dhikr, focusing on the words that you do remembrance of Allah with, outside of salah, so that state of mind is practiced outside and brought in. Similarly, you practice nawafil so that you can have khushu' easily in your fara'id, etc., etc. So yes, you know, it's fine to practice. Please do explain your understanding of how qadar and free will occur at the same time. I knew somebody was going to ask that. Okay, so I like to first explain some of the facts. So the Quran is clear and categorical about the fact that we have free choice. We have free choice. Based on those choices, we are rewarded and punished, etc. We know this, right? So those two facts, the fact that Allah has said, you know, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, that we showed him the two ways, right? وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala formed the self and then um, endowed within it its wickedness and its goodness. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, using the active verb, He says, the one who purifies his self is successful. The one who soils his self, right, pollutes his self, is unsuccessful, has lost, and so on. All of these examples in the Quran tell us that man has a choice, and then the consequence of man's action, resulting in reward and punishment. Justice dictates that reward and punishment is based on choice. Is based on man being able to make free choice. If man wasn't able to make free choice, then it would not be just to punish man, right? So we know that's a fact. Secondly, we know from the Quran and from the Sunnah clearly that things have been written kind of long before creation. So that's the second fact. The third fact is there are things in our lives that fall within our freedom of choice. There are also clearly things within our lives that fall outside of our freedom of choice. They're outside of our control, the domain of our control, right? Some of them we know they're completely outside. Some of them they're outside of our control in that we don't influence them, but somebody else might have. Somebody else's action might have, right? So somebody comes and knocks you with a car, their action influences what happens to you, right? So that person's action has impacted upon you negatively. You didn't really have a choice in the matter, like there's no way, like you can't see how you've played any kind of a role, right? So there's different ways in which our choices influence certain outcomes. Sometimes the outcomes are our own. Sometimes the independent choices that we make impact upon other people. So for those other people, it's outside of their control. So therefore, there are things completely out of our control. Where we're born, right? Who we're born to, yeah. When we're going to die, how we're going to die can sometimes be, be impacted by our choices, but not when, where we're born, who we're born to, who our siblings are, the overall circumstances of our life. Some of the complex variables of life are kind of outside of our control, right? How weather affects us, how the coronavirus affects us, how how an unexpected disease affects us and why we have it, etc., etc. People born with birth defects, born with abnormal strength, born with really well endowed height, another person born short, etc., etc., etc. These are things outside of our controls. We know here there is absolute qadar. There is like it's however it's been decreed, right? Meaning that we've not influenced it. So we know that's a fact. But then the things that we control are a fact. The fact that these things are written are a fact, right? How do all of these come together now is, so the facts are there. So first you believe the facts. If you can believe the facts, whether you can explain them or not doesn't matter. That's why I tell you the facts. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? First, acknowledge that makes sense. If you can believe in those things as fact because the Quran tells them, because the Sunnah tells them, etc., then they are fact and they work together. They're facts, they work together. Khalas. So therefore, it's not, there is an absolute predeterminism. We don't believe in determinism because we have freedom of choice. How do we know freedom of choice? Because God tells us we have freedom of choice. I mean, what else is there? So therefore, khalas, and the story is clear. How do they work together? Okay, so qadar is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knowing how everything will pan out before they happen. That's to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge and the way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed the universe. The vast majority of the universe's infrastructure, the vast majority of it has got nothing to do with you and me and our choices. It's totally beyond our control, right? Well, like, what do we know what's happening in another galaxy? What do we know what's happening on Mars? What do we know what's happening, I don't know, on the sun, right? What its temperature is, for example. What's that? You or I have absolutely no say, no influence, nothing. There are billions, there are an infinite number of variables that are simultaneously occurring in the universe that are outside of our control. So the vast majority of individual incidents happening in the universe are beyond our control. It's all qadar, right? That's not difficult to understand. Somewhere in all of that, in all of those infinite number of things happening, is mankind and mankind's freedom of choice. So mankind's freedom of choice is a little part of qadar. It's just a little part of it. And the end result of it is like there is this part in which there is the coding is really complex, basically, to use computing terminology. The way in which qadar works here with regards to this particular ashraful makhluqat, the most noble of creation, who's been given freedom of choice, it just works differently. But it's still being written, but it's been written with their freedom of choice taken into consideration, and all of the variables that go with it, and the end result having been known from before, written down. In here, there are variables that are man's freedom of choice that are factored in to the way things have been written down, right? So therefore, it's recorded, but without influencing free choice. So one way of understanding it, and some ulama have written this, is that knowing some pre-knowledge of something doesn't influence what's going to happen. So if I'm now going to choose to pick up my mouse, right? The fact that before I did it, that was written down, didn't influence my choice. That's just pre-knowledge. Pre-knowledge doesn't influence the outcome. It's just a record of the outcome. That makes sense? So that's basically it. Now, obviously, the way in which that's recorded is complex, because there are complex variables. But that complexity is not beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of all of the complexities of the universe. So it's not difficult for Allah. I mean, it's not exactly our 50p pencil that wrote down everything. It was a pen created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudra. Okay. On the topic of Allah already knowing what we're seeking in our hearts, we still ask for our needs, right? The Prophet always asked such specific du'as. Just a bit confused, what was meant in the commentary? There are so many prophetic du'as, and some of them are so long and details as well. Well, not all of the du'as that we know are authentic. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said in a hadith that that the Prophet ﷺ used to like general du'as. كان يحب الجوامع من الأدعية ويدع ما سوى ذلك. He used to like general du'as, and therefore didn't like and which would imply that the Prophet ﷺ didn't like du'as that were too specific. So by too specific, we mean, like, we say, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfill my needs, rather than say, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me a new set of shoelaces, and I also need to get tomorrow shopping, and I need broccoli and a box of eggs, and could you make that easy for me? That's specific, right? But Allah, fulfill my needs and make my daily livelihood easy for me, etc., etc. You know, rather than say, oh, Allah subhanahu, please make all of my children doctors. Allah subhanahu, make my children happy and prosperous in this dunya and in the akhirah, is a general dua compared to make my children this and make my children that. Because that's presuming to know that those things are good for your children. You don't know that, so why would you ask for it? It's actually stupid to do that. So we don't ask for specific things. And when we do ask, if we do entertain specific things, then examples such as the istikhara dua teach us that we should ask for specific things if they are good for us. Allah, I would like this, but give it to me if it's good for me. Do you understand? Meaning that we should always defer to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what is truly good for us. So actually, the Prophet ﷺ preferred specific, he didn't prefer specific du'as about material things. He didn't prefer specific du'as, but general du'as. However, it's permissible to make specific du'as for things that are definitely good. 100% you know they're good for you. Like Jannah is good for you, right? Jahannam is bad for you. Committing haram is bad for you, right? So therefore you can go in, you can make specific du'as about staying away from harams that you're engaged in. Allah, protect me from this haram, protect me from that haram, protect me from, because these things are definitely bad and you're having a problem with them. So you specifically mention them, right? There are things that are definitely good that you want to achieve that are not materialistic. Oh Allah, I would like to give me the tawfiq for tahajjud. I would love to be able to perform tahajjud every night. Give me the tawfiq for that. Allah, I'd love to be able to make a khatam of the Quran every month. Give me the tawfiq for that. Because that is objectively good. So those kind of things, yeah, you can be specific about. But things that aren't objectively good, things that are subject to the variables of dunya, things that are material in nature, those things you don't ask for specifically, but generally. Even like things that you might think are good for your children, you don't. Like I would never make specific du'as for my children, unless, I don't know, generally the idea would be to make dua for success rather than a specific outcome. Because the more specific the outcome is, the more you're assuming to know the benefit or harm of something. Okay, inshallah. Anything else? If not, let's close. I need to take a short break before I go into a meeting. Okay, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Allah bless you all. Quite a few people attended today, it seemed at one point. It's a pretty full class. And keep attending. Facebook Live people, don't forget that you'll see posts on my Facebook page. You can join the actual class and ask questions, etc. by enrolling on the Mawarid Lifestyle enrollment page for this class. It's free, so you can just join, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. صلى الله تعالى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه.